On a farm in Ireland lives Dan Riley, a cattle owner who is looking after one of his cows about to give birth. Shortly afterwards, Orla appears, a veterinarian working for the local biogenetics laboratory, which specializes in cattle. In the past, the two have been together, but the relationship is over and now they only deal with work matters. As soon as she arrives at the barn, Orla prepares her equipment and performs the medical procedure to confirm that the calf is all right. But she is startled when her hand is bitten by the calf, still inside her mother's body. With Dan's help, she manages to get her arm out and hurries to check the wound on her hand. Meanwhile, Dan sees an unknown trailer on his property and goes to check who is inside. As he approaches the vehicle, he finds the young couple, Jamie and Mary, who have run away from home and asked to hide out on the farm for a few days. However, Dan warns them that they must get out of there by dawn, or he will call the police. Afterwards, the farmer receives a visit from John, a scientist from the laboratory who has come to check the results of the experiment. Seeing the trailer nearby, he reminds Dan that all procedures carried out on the farm are confidential and tells him to get rid of the intruders. He then takes his equipment to check the cow and the results appear to be normal, but Orla warns him that the calf has bitten her. Despite showing the wound, John believes that it may have been caused by an involuntary movement of the animal and decides to return to the laboratory. When night comes, Dan can't sleep and goes to the barn, where he finds the cow stained with blood. Fearing that the calf inside her won't survive, he promptly prepares hot water and soap so that he can get it out before it's too late. However, the situation is more serious than he thought and the farmer tries to call the laboratory, but no one answers. In desperation, he runs to the trailer and asks Jamie to help him get the calf out, otherwise his mother will lose her life too. Even though he hesitates, Jamie decides to go along, because he hopes the farmer will let them stay hidden on the farm for longer. The two then run back to the barn, and with a lot of effort, manage to pull the calf out using forceps. Even so, the calf isn't breathing and Dan starts to turn it with his arms, as a way of getting all the liquid trapped in its lungs out. As soon as he puts it down, the calf starts breathing again, but in a surprise attack, it bites Dan's finger, which is seriously injured. The farmer rushes home and asks Jamie to mix alcohol with boiling water to sterilize the wound. Without hesitation, when the mixture is ready, the farmer sticks his hand straight into the pot and waits for the pain to pass. Just then, Mary goes to look for Jamie in the barn and finds the calf lying on the ground. She takes pity on the newborn and tries to stroke it, but Jamie quickly pulls her away and tells her that there is something wrong with the calf. He suggests disposing of the calf, as it is too aggressive and appears to be ill, but Dan refuses, as he needs to show it to Orla and John. With the matter settled, Dan thanks Jamie for his help and in return lets the couple stay as long as they need on his farm. A few minutes later, Orla turns up and asks why Dan hasn't returned her calls. The farmer then explains that he had to carry out an emergency delivery, but the calf doesn't seem to be doing well. He even had to separate it from its mother, because just as he did with Orla, the calf tried to bite her. This is not a good sign and the veterinarian decides to take a closer look at the calf. She notices that the animal's teeth are unusually shaped and sharper than normal. Orla then tries to call John to tell him that the experiment has gone wrong, but he won't answer her calls. With no other choice, the veterinarian takes a suitcase from the car containing a special gun used to eliminate cattle. As soon as she gets close to the calf, she tries to fire the gun, but ends up grazing him in the head and this arouses his mother's fury. Orla tries to reload the gun and Dan does his best to calm the cow down, but she ends up going through the fence and narrowly missing the vet. Even so, its paw ends up hitting Orla in the face, who reloads the pistol and takes out the animal with one shot. Then it's time to finish off the calf, but the veterinarian hesitates and lets the calf perish alone after losing a lot of blood. Orla then asks Dan to take the calf's body to a table so that she can analyze it. As soon as she opens the calf's body, the vet notices something abnormal about its organs, as if they had grown at an accelerated rate. Strangest of all, not only was the calf a heifer, but she was also pregnant. This seems impossible, but Orla finds several baby calves in their early stages inside her, all of them with frightening shapes. Faced with this terrible image, Dan asks what is going on and what they have done to the poor animal. Orla then reveals that John was working on a genetic modification of the cattle, with the aim of making them more fertile and making them develop quickly. However, the experiment went wrong and Orla believes that in addition to these symptoms, the genetic change may have started a dangerous infection. This makes Dan even more nervous, as he was also bitten by the heifer and demands to know what risks they are taking. However, Orla doesn't know how to respond and feels suddenly weak, indicating that the infection is spreading in her body. Dan soon regrets having acted this way and apologizes, but the vet leaves, promising to return the next morning with more information. Little do they know that one of the small, lifeless calves starts to move around the table and hides inside the barn. At dawn, Jamie and Mary go to check on the farmer and promise to help him with the chores until he recovers from his injury. Once again, he thanks them for their help and lends Jamie his boots so that he can feed the rest of the cattle. While Jamie heads to the corral, Mary is changing Dan's bandage when he asks how the couple met and what they're doing there. Mary tells that she comes from a large family of farmers, and when she met Jamie, her parents forbade her to be together. Because of this, they both decided to run away, and now she fears that if they are found, her brothers will eliminate not only Jamie, but also Mary, for running away. Back at the barn, the young man finds a cow standing alone in a puddle of water. When he takes a closer look, he notices that the animal has several wounds all over its body and decides to go back to warn Dan about it. However, as he steps into the puddle, he feels his foot being bitten and runs to see what has happened. When he takes off his boot, Jamie's foot is bleeding, but he can't find the animal that did it anywhere. As soon as he's cleaned the wound, Jamie calls Dan to come to the barn, but he can't explain what caused the cow's injuries either. The conversation is soon interrupted when a policeman called Tom turns up at the farm. Afraid of being discovered, Jamie hides and the policeman goes to talk to Dan about the trailer parked on the property. The farmer says it's a couple of friends who promised to help him on the farm, but the policeman finds this suspicious, as he's heard reports of trespassers on other farms. Before leaving, he tells Dan that he found Orla's car parked in front of another property, but the vet is missing. Dan is worried about this and the policeman tells him to get in touch in case she turns up. As soon as Tom gets on the road, Dan tells Jamie and Mary to hide their trailer inside the barn. He then decides to look for Orla, when he notices that one of the doors has been unlocked. When he investigates, he finds Orla's coat next to the body of the cow that gave birth to the infected calf. He tells the couple to stay away, to avoid contact with the body, and as a safety measure, he decides to build a bonfire and burn it. As night falls, Dan can't rest and decides to take another look around the barn in search of Orla. Inside, he sees a vehicle from the biogenetic laboratory, and then meets John, who asks where the cow used in the experiment is. Seeing the animal's destroyed body, he takes Dan to the laboratory near the farm, where Orla left the calf's body the day before. On checking on the animal, John tells the farmer to go home and he'll look into what might have happened with the experiment. Looking through the microscope, he notices cell reproduction that is much faster than normal. He then inspects the ultrasound of the calf at an early stage, and notices that inside it is a kind of parasite, which seems to feed on the host from the inside out. The analysis continues, as Dan returns home and feels that the wound on his hand is getting worse. He even starts to feel sick in front of the sink, proving that the infection also affects humans. Jamie is also affected by the bite on his foot, and during a romantic moment with Mary, he starts acting strangely. His girlfriend notices that he has a fever and asks what's wrong, but the young man just says he's feeling a little discomfort in the wound. Mary then asks her boyfriend to get some sleep, but as soon as they both fall asleep, the same parasite that bit Jamie appears in the trailer. The creature crawls across the floor, leaving a trail of goo everywhere, until it manages to climb into bed and gets under Mary's blanket. The young woman feels something moving, and as soon as she wakes up, she sees the creature and runs desperately out of bed. At the same moment, Jamie also gets up and sees the parasite crawling across the bed and hiding under the pillow. After the scare, the couple run to warn Dan, and together with John, they search for the parasite, but find only its trail through the bed. Jamie then decides to flee as soon as possible, but John stops them because they need to control the infection on the farm. The four of them then head to the laboratory, where the scientist shows them the parasites that have originated as a result of the genetic mutation experiment. Inside the cow, 6 of them were formed, but only one managed to survive, and is now on the loose on the farm, with the aim of parasitizing other cows. Hearing all this, Jamie insists that he and Mary run away, but John stresses that they can't do that. Now they have to find the parasite and eliminate it, because if it manages to escape, it will infect other cows, leading to a huge infestation of these creatures. From that moment on, John declares a security protocol and everyone must stay on the farm until the situation is under control. Mary then stays in the lab and John, along with Dan and Jamie, set off to check if the rest of the cattle have been infected. Arriving outside, they find a cow with several wounds on its body. Now that he knows the truth about the infection, Dan also warns the scientist that he was bitten by the infected calf, just like Jamie, who was stung by the parasite. Before he can give any more details, the 3 of them hear a strange noise coming from the corral. The place is completely flooded, but Dan still decides to go in with his tractor, as this might scare the parasite away, so they can capture it. When he arrives at the corral, the farmer drives around the place, but half the vehicle is flooded, and halfway there, the engine stops working. Now all Dan has to do is walk back, with almost his entire body covered in water. With a lot of effort, he reaches the end of the trail and there is no sign of the parasite, but Dan ends up tripping over something and sinks into the water. Jamie and John shout for him, until Dan gets up, carrying a human body with him. As soon as he pulls it out of the mud, the farmer realizes that it is Orla's body, already lifeless. Dan mourns the loss, but it's too late and the three of them take her body back to the laboratory. Mary calls the farmer to wait outside while John begins to analyze Orla's body. As well as finding some wounds on her neck and shoulders, the scientist sees a hole on the right side of her stomach. The size of the opening suggests that the parasite came out of the vet, devoured her insides and exited through her skin. However, as soon as Orla lost her life, her body temperature dropped, forcing the creature to flee in search of a new host. John continues to inspect the victim and finds a small piece of the parasite inside her. He promptly checks this sample under the microscope and notices accelerated cell growth. The scientist then carries out another test, taking a sample of his blood and mixing it with a piece of the parasite. To his horror, John realizes that his blood cells are assimilating the creature's cells, proving that the infection can also generate these creatures inside a human body. In this way, people could easily become infected, and soon the whole country would fall victim to this parasite. When he hears this, Jamie despairs, because he knows that he too is infected and will suffer the same fate as Orla. Still, John asks him to show him the wound on his foot, but Jamie refuses and says he's going to run away with Mary. The scientist tries to argue, saying that he will find a way to cure him, but the young man doesn't believe him and heads for the exit. John tries to stop him and the two start a fight inside the lab, with Jamie getting the better of him. He knocks the scientist to the ground and threatens to finish him off, but soon changes his mind and runs for the door. However, just as he was about to leave the lab, John attacks him from behind, firing his pistol straight into his head. Afterwards, the scientist tries to hide his body, while Jamie and Mary continue to wait outside the lab. Shortly afterwards, they hear a strange sound nearby and when they check it out, they find John inspecting a body covered in a dark cloth. Mary finds this strange, but the old man tells them to stay away, saying that he has already discovered how parasites develop. He shows the body of another cow lying on the ground with a huge hole in it. John explains that, after the parasite enters the body of one of them, it feeds on its insides and runs off to find new hosts. The creature must be after the last surviving cow on the farm and John asks where she is. Dan replies that she has been left in the barn in isolation and the two of them hurry to find her, as she is also about to give birth. Instead of following them, Mary decides to look for her boyfriend in the lab, but all she finds are bloodstains around the door. Nearby, John and Dan find the cow, and without hesitation, the scientist prepares his pistol and finishes off the poor animal. He then opens the body to see if the calf is alive, but the cow had already given birth moments before. John decides to go after the calf to dispose of it, but this provokes the wrath of Dan, who begins to attack the scientist and puts him against the wall. He accuses him of treating animals and human beings like laboratory experiments and that the loss of his cattle, as well as Orla's, was because of him. Dan then warns him that he's going to put an end to the case and intends to call the police to reveal the whole truth. But before he knows it, John has cocked his pistol once again and is advancing towards him. Dan tries to defend himself, but the scientist points the gun straight at his head and pulls the trigger. At the same moment, Mary arrives on the scene, and on seeing what John has done, she suspects that the same thing has happened to Jamie. The young woman runs to the barn to look for her boyfriend, but all she finds is his body lying on the ground. Shortly afterwards, the scientist corners her in the barn and points the gun at her, because he wants to eliminate any witnesses to his experiments. However, when he looks at Jamie's body, he sees the same hole on the right side of his stomach, indicating that the parasite is close by. Before he can do anything about it, the scientist is grabbed by the creature, which has grown even larger and more aggressive. John tries to defend himself, but is completely devoured by the parasite and Mary takes the opportunity to escape. On the way, she comes across Dan, who managed to survive after being grazed by the gun. With the two of them being the last survivors, they join forces to put an end to the parasite before it escapes from the farm. While inspecting the barn, they see the creature enter through an opening in the floor, and Dan tries to follow it, but is badly injured. Mary decides to go in his place, taking only her pistol and a flashlight with her. Passing through the opening, the young woman finds a flooded tunnel and Dan tries to help her by lighting the way with his flashlight. Finally, Mary finds the last calf, its body having been invaded by parasites. One of them tries to bite her, but the young woman destroys it using her pistol. After that, she sees more parasites coming out of the calf, and to put an end to the animal's suffering, she shoots it and destroys the rest of the creatures. With this, she has put an end to the last source of the infection. But there is still the first parasite to be found, which appears in front of the girl. The creature tries to attack her, but Mary manages to escape in time and crawls her way out. However, she ends up getting lost and ends up in an end, with the monster right on her tail. She tries to kick it away, but it's only a matter of time before she too becomes infected. This seems to be the end, but then Dan appears and triggers the machines inside the barn to attract the monster's attention. Thanks to this, the parasite is attracted by the sound and Mary manages to escape from the tunnel. She sets off in search of Dan and finds him sitting on the floor, asking her to be quiet because the parasite is nearby. Looking up, Mary sees the monster, and before she can be attacked, Dan shouts to lure it towards him. The parasite falls into the trap and starts to attack, but Dan holds it back with all his might and tells Mary to finish it off at once. Instead, the young woman breaks a glass jar above Dan, pouring water over the parasite, which is forced to retreat. Soon after, Mary finds an iron bar and tries to attack the monster, but it jumps towards the barn's machinery. To the creature's misfortune, the young woman uses the iron bar and pushes it against the gears, causing the parasite to be broken in half. Finally, with the creature lying on the ground, Mary strikes it several times until the parasite is finally eliminated. Now that they are free of the monster, Mary carries Dan to the car, but before they leave, the farmer tells her that they cannot leave the farm until they are sure that the infection has been controlled. However, seconds later, Dan doesn't resist his injuries and loses his life, with Mary being the only survivor of this frightening incident. Despite the farmer's final request, the young woman decides to leave anyway and walks off the property. 4 months later, in hospital, Mary discovers she is pregnant and goes for an ultrasound. The doctor tells her not to worry, because according to the tests, she'll be born a strong, healthy baby girl. Despite the medical diagnosis, the young woman suspects that Jamie's infection may have been transmitted to her. Unfortunately, the ultrasound shows a form very similar to that of the parasite, indicating that the infection will spread again very soon. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.